welcome. Hello. Too kind. Hello, good evening, and welcome to this, the TooFatLardies Oddcast. We're back in the studio once again on another cold and grey November day, but hopefully we'll be warming the cockles of your hearts with some suitably inspiring wargaming chat. There's something of a special episode today, as we're welcoming back my two guests from their recent expedition to Arnhem. So without further ado, let's welcome the Boy Browning and Daphne du Maurier of wargaming, Richard Clark and Nick Skinner. Gentlemen, welcome back to the studio. How are you doing?
Hello, Sid. Yeah, very well, thank you. Just about got over the exertions of the trip to Arnhem.
Which one of us is Boy Browning? I reckon I'd throw my hat into the ring for that as opposed to Daphne du Maurier. You're more Daphne du Maurier, I think.
I'm quite comfortable being Daphne, yes.
But at least I'm wearing a proper shirt, which is very much what Boy Browning would have done, of course, very crisp.
Yeah, and I'm wearing a rugby top, which I don't think is Daphne du Maurier, but never mind, we'll gloss over that.
It's a shame you're not Daphne from Scooby-Doo, but we possibly don't want to go there
either.
either.
Daphne or who's the other one?
Velma.
Velma. Yeah, you know them all. Yeah. You know them all, Sid, obviously. Yeah.
Extensive knowledge of Scooby-Doo, but we should definitely move on at that point. It was another lengthy road trip you both had. How was it compared to last year? Because last year I thought was just such a sensational event. How do you cap a sensational event? But maybe ask the South African rugby team, but you've did it yourself in your own way.
Well, I think I think the first year we went, that last year, I don't think we could top that. Actually, I thought that was the fact that we, that it was the first time that anything like that had been done. You can never take away that that excitement, can you? But this year, I was really pleased with the tables we took and the trip that we had as well. I mean, Arnhem, as always, great place to visit. We had an excellent team of people working together again with some new faces working with us this year as well to deliver it. And that was really good. So we should give them all a shout out in a minute, Rich. But actually, the trip was brilliant. The engagement was excellent. Came away buzzing as usual and exhausted as usual. So yeah, we had two tables of chain of command at the Hartenstein. One of them being Stations Vec, which was not the same table we had last year, so a different table that we took again this year that we worked hard on, and Richard particularly did some builds on. And the other table was near the Passberg School, which is again further down the perimeter than the tables we had last year. So we had different tables this year. We wanted to give people a different experience, and again, Rich and others worked hard on making the terrain for that. Plus, we had a water tanker table with Altjo and team, which is brilliant because that was in 15mm scale as well. So it was good fun for the kids and for for people to see a different type of game. But the engagement was excellent. I mean, Rich, what are your reflections on it?
Yeah, I thought it was. We took along some very different tables this year. What we did, funnily enough, whether by accident or design, we kind of filled in the gaps between last year's tables. So if you take the MDS Crossroads as the central point last year, the table we did, Stations Reg, is actually immediately north of that table, and also immediately to the east of the Paul Krugerstraat, which was the second table we did last year. And then the Passberg School table is directly to the south of the MDS Crossroads table. So actually, if we filled in the gaps now and put all 5 tables together, we could have one absolutely massive table. But I think what we put the emphasis on this time was really looking at where the actions happened that were interesting from a tactical point of view, rather than focusing on the landmarks. I think last year, one of our big objectives was to get something looking like the key points in the area that people would recognise. This year, we focused a bit more on gameable scenarios, and I think that was really positive. I think a lot of people enjoyed that. We had a lot of return visitors, which was nice. We had some guys who came last year from the Netherlands, first time they'd ever played Chain of Command, and they came back again for the second time they'd ever played Chain of Command. So that was great, really good fun. We had a couple of guys who drove 600 miles from Denmark to see us. So big shout out to them. Great to see you. So they clocked up a lot of miles, or in their case, even more kilometres, to get down to see us. So that was great. But we also added to the visit by spending the first day we were there, the Friday, in Driel. We took the ferry this time over, so we woke up at 8 o'clock in the morning, and we were docking just to the west of Rotterdam at the Hook of Holland. That's the Hook. That's the Hook. And so we were actually able to get out the car, and we were on the battlefield by 10:30 in the morning, which was great because we'd planned a battlefield tour of Driel, which I thought was really, really important. And I have to admit, the planning was a bit last minute, but fortunately, the reading Nick had done complemented the reading I had done. And in the end, by accident rather than design, we actually turned out to have a really good battlefield tour, because we all know the Poles were there. What the hell did they do? We're not really certain, apart from the fact they were south of the river. So we were able to get some key books on that, and really work out exactly what happened. And I found that to be the most fulfilling part of the weekend, taking the opportunity while you're there doing something to add on a bit of historical battleground walking. And we had a great time with Aidan, Dolly, and Jasper, who and little Anton, who joined us for that. So yeah, we had a great day doing that.
Drill was fascinating. You know, seeing
only
seeing the actions where the Polish powers were engaged is really meaningful, because actually it's just a sideline in most Arnhem histories. So to go to these locations and to absorb that and understand what it meant for the Poles when the household cavalry met up with them, for instance, you know, don't forget the Poles are isolated south of the river with no heavy armor at all, no heavy weapons, you know, and then these Daimler armor cars turn up, which is a bit like, you know, must feel like the Tiger tanks have just turned up to help you out. It's really interesting perspective on it. But not only did we do Driel, and the Bands of Brothers fans, we also did the Bands of Brothers Crossroads action. You know, the one, Sid, where Dick Winters runs across the field and jumps up on the dike and shoots the German sentry on the other side in the field. Well, that is literally about 3 miles west of Driel. So we also took our Wellington boots and moved across to that part of the island and stood on that location and talked that through, which was quite interesting as well. And that's a really kind of unchanged battlefield, which is always lovely when you find a small place like that that's very much as it was. The roads are a bit more modern now. The roads have been a bit more built up and sort of adopted a bit more. But otherwise, it was very easily work out what you were looking at and how the action unfolded. So that's always great. Yeah.
I mean, all of that is just tremendous. I mean, it's a really interesting area. It's great when you actually go to cinematic locations, and if they've not changed, that is a really buzzy, sort of exciting moment. But I must say, the opportunity to game in the Hartenstein is pretty amazing. So full marks to you both for flying the flag, and indeed everyone who's part of that team.
Yeah, and Richard already mentioned the two guys from Denmark, Jan and Peter, who came down. I need to say thank you for my book, Jan, as well, that you gave me. That's very kind of you. I shall add that to the collection. And yeah, really good. The guys came down, spent some time playing the games, great conversations, good, enjoyable social as well, from everybody, from the Dutch and the Belgians and the Brits. We missed our German contingent this year, which was a shame, but the rest of the guys put in a great effort.
Yeah, and Nick, good of you to thank them for the book. I'd like to thank Vincent and Sam from Antwerp for the filthy hangover that stayed with me for about 4 days. But what a fun time we had reaching that point. But yeah, great time. Really good food, wasn't it, Nick? Brilliant. Really outstanding food. Couldn't have been made more welcome by the local licensed vitulers. So yeah, great time all round.
And do you think you'll be back next year?
No.
I think that we have, we've done last year, we've done this year. I think my feeling is that it is something that, really we should be handing over to our Dutch colleagues to run as an annual event. And it's not something that we can continue to commit to every single year. I love going to Arnhem. I love playing war games. It's an expensive weekend, Sid. We're out there for 5 days, hotels at £200 a night or whatever it is. or what, it soon adds up lots of money, beer and food, accommodation, time off work, negotiation with other family members. It's a difficult thing to commit to on a regular basis when we've got so many things in the calendar. I'd love to go back, but whether we can be the chief deliverers of it, I'm not so sure any longer. We'll see.
Yeah, I would second that. I mean, it is expensive. And we are going to Arnhem for a Lardy Games Day, a Dutch Lardy Games Day in April. So going out there twice, not really viable. And the other thing is, and I've talked about this in recent Oddcasts, is the fact that it took me, 2 weeks to do the build for that, and all the time I'm doing that, I'm not actually doing what I need to be doing. So lots of things have fallen by the wayside while I've been doing that, like the Far East Handbook, General D'Armée, and Midgard, all of which I've got a bit of news on actually, but we'll come on to that, I'm sure. So it's kind of right. The level of input that we put into it the last 2 years running has been one that we can't really maintain and sustain. And the fact that it's a 2-day event means that by default, even if you just turned up just in time and left immediately afterwards, you're still looking at 3 nights in a hotel, a crossing across the channel, and all of these things. The elves don't leave the tickets on your desk while you're asleep at night. You actually have to pay for the bloody things. So yeah, it's great fun to do, but there's a limit to how many times you can do it, because it's not we're flying the flag for wargaming. We're not flying the flag for TooFatLardies, and we're not trading. So it is an event. If we went to Partisan and we were there trading and running games, we might run games, but we'll also make some money. Going to Arnhem doesn't do that at all.
Well, that was one of the questions I was going to ask, with all your travel, whether you've actually had any time to do any work. But that's not the question for the opening segment, because it's time for us to take a wander to the workshop to reveal everything in there. Let's head down now. Okay, so here we are in the workshop. There's lots of bits and pieces everywhere, and I can see various sort of discarded bits of buildings. Maybe that's the off spool of what you were damaging the buildings with for the Arnhem build. But I mean, apart from Arnhem, maybe what have you been up to on the hobby front, chaps?
Well,
Rich?
I've been doing a lot of painting for In the Buff, which has been fabulous. And bloody miniatures have been my go-to toys. And while I was away, literally as I was about to leave for Arnhem, I got another box from them, which is still here on my desk, which is all the first box they've done of Cavalry, which are absolutely beautiful figures. 16 figures, 16 troopers, 16 horses. They look great. I'm trying to put them to one side at the moment because I've got other things to do, but I've really enjoyed painting them. They are such beautiful figures. It's inspired me to make an effort and try hard. And I've been really pleased with the result. They do look lovely.
That's terrific. They are really nice figures. I was really impressed when I saw them in the flesh, so to speak, at the club the other week. They're really, if anyone hasn't picked them up yet, these are bloody miniatures, and they're available certainly online and produced in the UK, but they're really nice, hefty sort of figures. They're a good size, and I think, which is really important for people taking games around shows, they are very robust. We might have had the conversation before about plastic miniatures, which are fantastic, but they do tend to be a little bit fragile, especially if you're using them in a participation game, whereas you can just see, picking up those bloody miniatures figures, that they would do very well in a participation with the various different people playing the game. Rich?
And we did run a participation at Selwick. We ran 3 games through the day. I mean, the rules are far too early to be going out for public scrutiny, but we put it on the table and people loved it. They had a great time. We had a real laugh with some, really good fun blokes and girls as well, which is fabulous. So, yeah, I think it's the aesthetics of the English Civil War, but without the lumbering pipe blocks. It's that local skirmish that has a real appeal. It's almost more colourful than Napoleonics, more flamboyant than medievals. It's got all the sexy stuff about it. And I pinched some of your terrain, Sydney, some of your small footprint terrain, which you'd created for Flashing Blades. Larden, a Flemish village. Well, Larden, a Flemish village, became a village in Rutlandshire, which we had a situation where Sir Sidney Roundwood, MP, had his duck house stolen off his pond, and he'd gone to retrieve it from his evil neighbour, Sir William Stewart, who'd nicked it. So a real classic English Civil War encounter.
It certainly seems like there's lots of leather involved in the ECW, which is probably one of the things that draws you to it, Sid. And different types of brown that you need to paint your leather. When you've got those horses there, Rich, my first thought was, bloody hell, not horses to paint. Then I thought about the fact that I've backed that 7th Cavalry Little Bighorn Kickstarter, and just think how many horses are going to land through my letterbox at some point in the future.
I like painting horses. I really do. I think I find it quite easy and very rewarding. For not a lot of effort, they can look really great.
It's all about technique, isn't it, really, painting horses? Yeah. It's all about having a plan. I think if the plan is just to paint them brown, then they don't always look good. But I think even with just a little bit of either the use of contrast paints, we'll come on to that in a moment, or inks, or maybe layering, they can look really good. I think the problem with a lot of horses is the reins are not necessarily particularly distinct, and that can be a bit frustrating. But it's really a question of which horses you pick. There are some really great ones out there, and there are also some ones which don't particularly look anatomically correct for horses, but we'll leave that discussion for another day. So
what Nick, kind of anatomical details do you check on the horses, Sid? All of them, or just the ones?
Well, the ones I'm thinking about, actually, the legs and the heads.
Oh, okay.
And not mentioning any manufacturers. No. Those horses which their legs and their heads do look odd are wonderful to paint, but they don't look particularly horse-like. No, I've not seen any horses which look like them in any field or racecourse I've ever been to. But they are really practical, and they're really useful to take to participation games. We said they're robust and they don't fall apart.
Tails always interested me on horses. I'm never quite sure what to do, how to paint tails. I'm not really into horses.
If you've got a brown horse, paint it black. If you've got a white horse, paint it black. If you've got
some reference materials might help there, Nick.
Yeah,
like a book.
My Little Pony. Sid's got a big library full of their stuff.
Yeah, well, I'll watch the Grand National. That's a good source of horse information.
Well, that's hopeless, though, isn't it?
In one of his books, hasn't he? I think.
Yeah, Henry's got a great colour scheme in the book, but that's hopeless. The Grand National, because they're all thoroughbreds, and obviously all horses in the world are not thoroughbreds. In fact, very few are, because they and especially in the sort of earlier periods, they do not tend to be thoroughbreds. They're all different sort of breeds. But we are diverting to a possible future segment on horses.
Well, I've got some. There's some gypsy horses over the field out the back of me, and they're definitely not thoroughbreds. But I can look at them for a colour scheme because they would give a contrast. They look more like American Indian horses, like that patchy pattern. I don't know why they're specifically like that.
There's the Appaloosa.
Is that what they're called?
I think so.
Is that like a pinto? Anyway, it's all different types.
Pinto. Yeah. Maybe I'm completely wrong. I'm not a huge horse expert.
You mean you're not an expert on huge horses, or you're not a huge expert?
I'm only good on
small. Rather fight 100 huge experts on the horses.
I'm only an expert on Shetland ponies. It's only small horses that I'm an expert on. Right, enough of this waffle and nonsense. Enough of this waffle and nonsense. This is rubbish. This is not what our viewers and listeners want to hear, a point which we'll come back to later. Yes. Let's get on with describing, do we have any best bits on the bench?
Well, I made some buildings for Arnhem, and the way I made them was I used 9mm MDF to make the boxes, and I got Paul at Sabotage to print the windows and doors. But what obviously I had to do was stick the boxes together, and I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll drill them out with pilot runs, and I'll screw them together so they're completely rigid. And then I thought, bollocks to that, that's ridiculous. So I went to Homebase, and I bought an Evo Stick product, which really deserves to be mentioned on the best bit on the bench, if only because of its name. And it's a gun-in product, like mastic, with a mastic tube where you chop the nozzle off and you put the nozzle on, and then you gun it out. And remarkably, it's called Sticks Like Shit, which I'm amazed that Evo Stick makes something called that. But what it does do is it sticks like shit. So when I got my bits of wood, I just gunned this on and put them all together and just left it on the side overnight, completely rock solid. And it's called all-weather adhesive and superior bond strength. Well, I don't know if it has superior bond strength, but it's got a remarkable name, which and it did the job perfectly well. So if you're doing anything, building something solid that needs a heavy duty adhesive, building terrain, I can truly recommend this product. I'm not going to say the name again because Sydney waving his arms about. But sticks like shit is my suggestion.
We are a family-friendly show, so the product is actually sticks like SH asterisk T, but yeah.
What do you think it means then, Sid? Sticks like shut? Sticks like shot?
I was about to say it doesn't take much imagination to guess what the asterisk is there for.
Well, I went into Amazon and I typed in sticks like, and it auto completed shit for me. So I didn't even have to know the profanity.
I do object to the name, actually. I can't believe it's not butter.
Yeah.
But I don't like this name.
Well,
anyway,
you can't build buildings with I can't believe it's not butter.
No. And you do wear that aftershave, Sid, stinks like piss.
Yeah, we could have got you some of that on the ferry, Sid. They were doing that.
It was on offer, £8.
Oh, the pissoir.
The things you can find on North Sea ferries. Let's not
Most
dwell
of them do
there.
stink like piss, actually, after a long journey.
Well, I've moving on from this nonsense. I've been using GW contrast paints. They're not new at all from Games Workshop, but I have a lot of their inks, and I really like their inks. They're really fine. But I had been listening to a couple of other podcasts, which are in the 40k and Warhammer kind of community podcast, and I thought I'd give these contrast paints a bit of a go, really out of just boredom of all the other paints I've got, and I do quite like them. I found them interesting to use alongside the inks. The inks I tend to see they really do pool, especially if you've got a lot of texture on the figures. And I don't find that particularly the best sort of way of doing inks because I don't really want that pooling effect. So I tried diluting the inks and that helps a little bit. But you still
pool, but it will.
They still do pool,
The colour will be diluted. So
So I was trying to solve that problem, and I tried the contrast paints. They pool less. They kind of stain, and I think I understand it's a different layer which is adhering to the surface of the figure. They do pool, but I had a good result with the contrast paints in diluting them just a little bit with water, and also I tried that with Flow Improver as well. And I think I'm going to persevere. I'm getting some quite nice effects of using both the contrast paints and the inks, and I would say that using them on figures where you've got a lot of the same coloured clothing, figures in a uniform, figures with maybe sort of bleached linen or something in the ancient world, or figures which are just like a large proportion of flesh, such as Gallic barbarians or whatever it is, getting some really good results there. So that was a really interesting sort of experiment, and I've really enjoyed them. I used them on some goblins, good Lord believe, and Japanese goblins don't wear much, but the contrast paints made a really good job of those.
I'm wondering, Sid, if they are. Is it right for me to think of paints like this? You've got the washes, and you've got the contrast paints, and then you've got the inks, and they sort of get thicker in their consistency as you go from one end to the other. So if you're watering down a contrast paint, you're turning it into a bit of a wash. Would that be right?
Yeah, I mean, you're using it more of a glaze. I think it's probably the word that people would use. So I think you start off with. No, not Peter Glaze. You start off with something like a Vallejo model paint, but that's quite thick, and if you thin it down, you can lose some of the texture of the paint as it kind of fragments. But the washes and the contrast paints seem to be much better designed to thinning them down. And I think just playing around with the different effects. If anyone was interested, Colin over at I can't remember what Colin's Twitter handle or X handle is, but he's painted some really great sort of plague bearers, which I think he did with contrast paints, and they look really good, and he's used them with inks, and it's just the way that you can get different varieties of color. The contrast paints are thicker than the inks, they're easier to use, but a trick which I got from Matt Slade is don't just dip the figure in the contrast paint or splash it all on it. Painting it as if it was just a normal paint and enjoying the different results, I think pays dividends. Sorry, Rich.
Is that Colin Fingers Murray?
I believe so.
Yeah.
Cole
Murray.
Yeah, I couldn't remember Cole's surname.
I've
And I
used
could
them,
only
as you
think
say,
of
Sid.
Saunders, which obviously
No, that isn't.
would have been incorrect.
No.
As you say, Sid, I've used them on on some of my well, you've got figures, as you say, of mostly one color. So when you've got lots of khaki or green or whatever, and washes stroke contrast plate, to be perfectly honest, I don't really see the difference between the two. I know what Matt's saying about don't slap it all over. You just put it on a certain part of it. But for your ECWs, Rich, they'd be brilliant, probably.
No. Well, I wonder. In 1983, I went to Salute, and I played Dark Age Infantry Slog, which was being run by Andy Callan, who'd written them, Dark Age set of rules.
Yeah.
And I really loved the idea of it. And there was an article in one of the War Games magazines, which was about building armies on beer mats, and I thought, this is a great combination. I can do Dark Ages on beer mats because they just look like and I bought an irregular miniatures army of Dark Age Irish, and I wouldn't say they were the most beautiful figures in the world, but they were the first army that I ever painted where I used the technique of spraying them white, a white undercoat, and then at the time, the only paints we had were Humbrol enamels. At the time, what I did was I mixed the Humbrol enamels up with white spirit and painted it on as a wash.
Yeah.
And the results that I'm seeing look very, very similar to that white undercoat with a wash over the top, a thinned down Humbrol wash over the top. And I used that very much with oat coloured sort of sacking type clothing, and Humbrol did a colour which was slightly off white. It was a bluish tinge called unbleached wool,
linen,
unbleached linen.
Yeah.
It's the type of thing now that it would have a name like bollocks, and you'd paint the lounge in it, off white, a hint of whatever. But I look back at that and I think, things haven't really moved on from me. The results that I'm seeing with the contrast paints look exactly like what I was mixing up with Humbrol in 1983. But I was obviously a very small child, clearly.
Well, one of the things with Humbrol paints is that you're using white spirit or turpentine, aren't you? Which is a great sort of medium to dilute sort of an oil-based paint with, and you can do that obviously with sort of oil-based painting. I mean, that is very subtle in its own right. Water is less subtle; it tends to degrade the paint.
Yeah.
And I think the thing with contrast paints and inks is that the way that GW have done them is that they do allow dilution with water, which is much more easier than using white spirit. So I think you're right. What you're doing is no different, but I would humbly suggest that the quality of the paint is so much better than it used to be in the 70s and the 80s. We've probably got listeners who are thinking, who are these dinosaurs going on about this? But the paints really were not great in the 70s and the 80s. What everyone has to choose from now is so infinitely better. And I would suggest it's a lot more flexible as well.
Okay. It's interesting, isn't it? I'm torn because John Savage posted some pictures of his Vietnam figures that he's doing with sort of Vietnam Chain of Command this week, and he very much uses that 3-paint foundry sort of, I think it's Kevin Dallimore sort of started it off. Anyway, he uses that triad sort of system, and I look at that and I don't think I could achieve what he achieves with it, but you look at that and you think, cool, all these washes. I don't think John uses washes at all. He just uses the 3-paint system. And I think it's all about finding a technique that you're comfortable with. And for me, I know when I wash, not personally, when I use washes on figures, it looks like the colour's been washed out, literally, so if I was doing the British uniform in the Peninsula, it would look like a red coat that had been washed out with the sun. So in some situations, I could see it working in my favour. But when I'm doing English Civil War, where I want really vibrant, strong, bold colours, I'm still going to stick with paints, full-on paints and washes and highlights.
Well, there's a lot of things to unpack there, and we don't want to derail too much. John's style is wonderful, and I think that's one easy thing to say, but that does take time. And also I think that one of the dangers with that layering sort of system is that the more layering you do, the more fine it looks on a photo. But I mean, John and other people exaggerate the layering. It looks brilliant from a distance. I think some of the difficulty with painting things really accurately and really well is you can just lose it on a tabletop. One of the things I don't think you lose on a tabletop is figures which have a light undercoat and then have been washed, because they tend to be more iridescent. They tend to be something which is visible. And one of the things I've noticed over the course of this year is, things which are really nicely painted from close up when you see them don't always deliver all of the effort on the table when you actually look at them close up. So one of the reasons I wanted to try these sort of washes and contrast paints was to try and get an image and a visuality which looks really good from a distance, which is what most people are seeing at a war game show or games day, as opposed to just being good on the photographs.
Right, excellent. Well, that's an interesting product, Sid. So I think what we've learned from that is that John Savage's painting you think is a load of old tat. Well, shall we? I don't think we've really got a best bit on the bench. You've got some manky old.
Hang on a minute. Whoa,
right. Have you got anything?
I haven't said anything yet.
Right. Well, you don't normally do anything.
No, well, indeed. But the other thing I was going to say about washes and contrast paints is they've massively sped up my ability to paint Second World War figures. So, all I do now is for British infantry, for instance, I do a kind of a dark brown undercoat. Then I just do a really heavy dry brush.
Yeah.
Then I do the webbing. Then I put on a wash. And that actually, and then I touch it up after that. But that gives me the core depth of the uniform, which is sped me up considerably, because I used to use more of a layering, what's it called? The foundry method. Of a base, a mid color, and a highlight. And then I used to wash as well. And I do a bit of everything, and never consistently either. But I've got a best bit on the bench suggestion as well.
Okay.
So, my daughter's just moved to the West Country, and I went down to visit her, and I was in a town, I think it was called Midsummer Murders, Midsummer Norton, Midsummer Radstock, Midsummer, something like that, not very far from Bath. They've got a model shop, a little old model shop in the high street, and they sell lots of model railway stuff. In fact, it was hilarious because somebody had just brought in a whole load of kit, second-hand stuff in this little shop. And there's this little old fella on his hands and knees in this shop, going through the box, trying to pick out all the bits that he wanted from this stuff that had just come in. He's probably still there, bless him. But anyway, they sell other stuff. They sell the Metcalfe range. Now, Metcalfe make sort of card buildings and scenery for model railways. But I picked up these paving slabs. Now, I've had them before, but only through a chance encounter that I picked them up in another model shop somewhere. But they are literally paving slabs. These are HO00 scale, so they're a bit small for what we've normally used them for, but they are brilliant for terrain builds. And they do other things like pathways and cobblestone tracks and a little range of stuff, which, although it's out of scale, you can still take it and apply it in 28 mils. Really useful. And I put that forward as the best bit on the bench because they are brilliant. And I've got in this particular box here, which is the size of a bit bigger than an A5 postcard, £6.50, and I think I've got probably about 400 paving slabs already cut and ready to go, and adhesive as well, so they stick down without the need to use glue or even sticks like shit, Rich.
What are they made of?
Card. Yeah, card construction kit.
So your best bit on the bench is card?
Yes, mate.
Okay. Well, you win, mate. I can't compete. It's a bit of card that has got a sticky back.
Yeah.
Brilliant. I wish I'd thought of it, mate. I never have to spend years writing stupid rule sets. All I'd have to do would be make some sticky back card. Brilliant.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Okay. I can see where I went wrong.
Well, I think that wraps up the wonders of the wargaming product emporium for another month on the workshop.
What's
you did. No, we can't compete. You did.
Hooray.
Stick can't compete with a little old man on his hands and knees making bits of sticky back cardboard.
Well, he's not making them, is he? But the shop sells them, and a load of interesting stuff as well. And also, they make the things that I use in my Go Commando game when I made the railway bridge with the for the dockyard and that. So you can don't normally think about card, but actually with a bit of extra support around the edges, it can really look okay.
You really sold it to me, mate. You really sold it to me.
I can tell.
I think I might be driving to the West Country tomorrow to randomly hope I can find it in a village called Bristol Bonkers.
It's called
whatever it's meant
Midsummer
to be
something.
called.
Midsummer.
British Bulldog. Midsummer Murders.
Midsummer Norton, I think it might be called.
Okay, right. Well, I'll be on shortly.
It's like the eclectic mix of things on the workshop and a worthy winner, I think we have to say. Let's head back to the studio where, fortunately, I've got a really big issue waiting for us that may well split some opinions.
From the makers of Chain of Command comes a tale of drama.
Mon capitaine, les Anglais are on the bridge. Ah, so it seems we shall meet again, Captain Fondleau.
A tale of action.
That's it, lads. Give them another volley, they're falling back. Remember, 3 rounds a minute.
A tale of romance.
But Mr. Fondleau, you are so
Prominent for large skirmishes in the era of black powder. Where the story ends, sharp practice begins.
Sidney Roundwood's Sofa of Sincerity.
Right, chaps, pull your chairs up by the fire, please. Parker's just thrown another log on, and I think we need to thaw out from the outside and the workshop. Now, I don't know if your road trip allowed you to catch up with any podcasts, but I had an email recently from long-time listener Ned Sullivan from Rumagama in southern New South Wales, Australia. Good to hear from you again, Ned.
Spoken said, like a native, that was, Sid.
It was.
I was very careful not to upset our beloved Australian friends.
I think it's Woomagama, mate. I think they call it Woomagama.
I'm a POM, so they'll probably excuse me and just laugh.
Woomagama, yeah,
definitely. Pond life, is that right?
POM, not pond.
Oh, sorry. Right.
Dear Sydney, me and the blokes down here love the Oddcast. We never miss an episode. We were chatting over a couple of schooners the other evening and wondering what makes for a good podcast. So we thought we'd ask the expert, what thoughts do you and the blokes have as to what makes a podcast a success? He went on to say some other things, which we'll come to at the end of the show. Well, Ned, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure that we're actually the experts, but we can give it a go. In fact, who's going to go first out of the two of you? Maybe Nick to start with.
Well, I don't think we're not. I mean, are we the best people to ask what makes a good podcast? I don't know. I know what I like to listen to.
Yeah, no, I think we're not. And I think what's interesting is that we've never really had any feedback from anybody telling us this is good or that's bad and this is bloody awful or whatever. So we kind of plowed on regardless. There was a podcast in the US that I listened to a few months ago that accused of us of making shows that go on for 2 or 3 hours. And I thought, well, that ain't right. So I went and had a look. But we're definitely not the experts. But let's talk about it, because maybe we can say some things that would encourage you, the listener out there, to give us some feedback as to whether you think what we're saying is right or total rubbish. Are the shows too long, too short, too fat, too round, too thin, too ugly, too handsome, whatever. Feedback, please. But we'll talk about it in the interim and see if our thoughts prompt another.
Yeah, it's not all about length, is it? Really, it's about content. It's about content and energy, and I think we have energy in our discussions, which is really interesting. I think the dynamic, the human dynamic, is an important thing as well. It's not a monologue that we're delivering; it's a conversation. I think that's an important thing for podcasts. Relevance is an important thing to have when you're looking at what these things have got available to them. What do you like to listen to? Sid, in your podcast, what do you enjoy?
Well, I do listen to a lot of podcasts. I found them really good to sort of go to the gym with, also commute with, and just paint with as well. So I've got a wide number of podcasts. The hobby podcasts I really enjoy and I would recommend, certainly from a rules design point of view, are 2 podcasts in particular. There's one called Rule of Carnage, which is very, very good, which John Savage actually put me onto. It's by 2 guys who have designed some of the Osprey rules, and that's very interesting. And also one of the guys, Mike Hutchinson, who I got in touch with. Hi, Mike. also put me in touch with two guys in the States who did a podcast called Designing Games. And that's really interesting as regards the things that the two guys, Will Hindmarch and Nate Spalletta, identified as being relevant to designing role-play games, but it's also pretty relevant for designing things like participation games at shows and also just games in general. Then there's a couple of podcasts, one well-known one at the minute called The Painting Phase, which generally focus on Warhammer games, but also has quite a number of the sort of XGW members there who have various guests talking about painting. They've had some commission painters on there, and they've had some experts in brushes and things like that. Some quite unusual podcasts there. And then you've got a host of wargaming podcasts as well, some of which are very well known, we mentioned before. And I generally sort of like to listen to, a wide range of hobby podcasts. But the thing which in doing this show that I came to was thinking about the things which really make a good podcast. So I had Sydney's 7 rules of a good podcast. So the first, I know.
Hang on, I'm going to get my pen. Let me get my pen for this. Sydney's
this is real
7 rules.
Yeah, this is real preparation. This is.
Okay.
Well, it's for you, mate. Yeah.
We can write them down. We can see whether
I'm writing them down. I've got a pen here.
Right, so pens and papers at the ready, boys and girls.
Yeah.
So the first one, and I'll go into each of these in detail. We won't cover them all in detail to start with. So purpose, script, ? Duration, content, guests, listeners, and editing. So those, I think, are the 7 things I would look for in a podcast. Richard?
Would you say that they were Sydney's pillars of wisdom?
Yes. There's not really much I can say other than the word yes there.
So this is an interesting one because I never really thought about that. I was just thinking about how long should it be? What should we be talking about? But purpose is good because I suppose you're starting at the very beginning and it's a very fine place to start. And what are we looking to achieve? And when I think of some of the podcasts that I listen to, or some, maybe not just podcasts, but also sort of online stuff generally, because I often actually consume this stuff while I'm painting, but for some reason I have it on YouTube. I don't know why that is, but probably because I normally paint at my desk with the computer there. And, and the computer's there so often. I mean, if I'm listening to a show that's available on podcasts, I'll probably listen to it on their YouTube version. So some of those things are people who are doing shows because they're content producers, if you like. I'm a content producer, and therefore I'm gonna put on a show that's gonna entertain, and so maybe they'll have a different guest every week. Maybe they'll have different sections on the show on painting or techniques or whatever, and that is a different type of purpose than maybe the purpose that we have, which I don't really know what our purpose is, but it isn't really that, is it? Our purpose is to talk to the community and tell them what we've been up to, because we get a lot of people saying, what have you been up to? And it's an easy way to communicate that. Sid, what do you reckon? What on earth are we doing here?
Well, I thought that purpose probably broke down into some podcasts have a specific purpose. So the Designing Game podcast looked at 50 episodes, which they took a listener through all the different stages of designing a set of rules, a role-playing game in that regard. Everything from initial design to theme, to characters, to rewards, to publishing, and so on. Some podcasts, I think, try and capture what's contemporary and content based, and I think to some extent, we do that, but a lot of other podcasts do as well. They review things coming out, they talk about things which are new, they introduce people to ideas that are current and being talked about at that point in time. But I think there's also podcasts which are themed around guests, different guests each week. There was I thought a really good podcast, which is no longer active now, called Drink, Spin, Run. And this was an amalgamation of drinking alcohol, spinning records, and running games. It really worked, and they had different guests each week. Each one of those was an author who'd produced various different sort of gaming books, generally role-playing books. So there was a theme, and the theme revolved around the guests. So there's different sort of ways in which there's a purpose to the podcast. I think a lot of podcasts are there to sort of keep in touch with people, to tell people about new ideas which are out there. But I think having a purpose, and I think that's probably our purpose, which is built around TooFatLardies. What are we we, or you rather, the creators doing, and what is the next thing coming up? That's really the heart of the show. And whether it's what you're doing as a games day or what you're doing as a set of rules, that's really the purpose of the podcast and developing things from there.
Do we ever really do that, though? We never sit here and go, hey, what's great now, Sid? It's got a fabulous new set of rules coming up, and that's going to be all based on this, mate, and it's going to be hype, hype, hype. I think we tend to talk more about just what's going on in the hobby, don't we?
Well, we talk about stuff that's, we can only ever talk about stuff that's in our radar, can't we? And of course, a lot of that is stuff we're working on because that's what we see. But we talk about other stuff as well, I think. I don't know what purpose is a difficult one. I've been involved in some sort of corporate podcast discussions lately, and this concept of purpose, what are we trying to achieve? What's our goal, vision, mission, and strategy is kind of not something we've really ever got into. We just said, let's get together, have a chat. Some other people found that interesting to listen to. Whether we're still in that stage or not, I don't know.
Well, maybe a different word for purpose might be focus, because I would say that the podcasts which don't have focus, and these are podcasts which are not really wargaming podcasts, but those tend to fall away if they don't have a focus. If they do have a purpose, they tend to at least go for a particular period of time until they feel the purpose has started to dwindle. But if a podcast doesn't have a focus, it's not going to be around there for a long time, because that's going to translate to the audience.
So we have a focus. We have a pretty clear wargaming focus, obviously. If you're looking for wargaming podcasts, sooner or later you will come across us. That's one of the hashtags. But we are also historical wargamers. We're not don't tend to do much of the other stuff. Well, certainly I don't, and Rich does even less. And Sid, you've dabbled in all kinds of bizarre things, I know. But, we're generally historical wargamers. So we talk about the wargaming side of our hobby. We don't really talk about the history very much, do we? We're not sitting here talking like today. We're going to talk about the Battle of Stalingrad or the Battle of Waterloo or the campaign of Gettysburg or Jackson and the Shenandoah or anything like that. We don't tend to focus on history very much, do we?
No, and I think that's probably because, I don't know, wouldn't it? I think it might be interesting to see a list of what big issues we talked about over the last 85 years we've been doing the show, to see what we did talk about. But we don't tend to. The shows that I've really enjoyed are ones where we have talked about historical issues and where we've gone to the library and looked at books.
The library is good.
That illustrate what we've been saying. But we're never really saying, Battle of Stalingrad, and I recommend this book called The Big Book of Stalingrad. We tend to be talking about command and control, or we tend to be talking about logistics, or we're talking about issues rather than events, or we're talking about methods rather than the way they're necessarily applied in a historical situation. So it makes me wonder what the hell we're doing here. What are we talking about?
Well, I would say that we've got a focus. I think that we generally have a purpose. But let's go further down the list, because we're getting onto one of the topics which we do want to talk about, which is controlling what we say, or focusing on what we say, to script or not to script. Now, the readers, or the audience rather, might not know that we do have a script. So I produce the script and I interview both, or talk to you both in respect to the script. So having a script, I think, gives that focus, because then we're able to agree in advance what we're going to talk about. I think with 3 people, otherwise it can get a bit haywire without having a focus, Nick.
Yeah, I think you do send out a script, Sydney. I normally read it about 3 minutes before we come on air, if you like. So it's useful to have the structure, but it's we kind of go off on a tangent when we need to, don't we? We follow the energy, and you have the job of trying to keep us focused with the script and keep us talking about the right thing at the right time. And if there's something we have to save till later in the show, you try to get us to do that by waving your arms like a lunatic.
Pretty much.
Well, let me give you an example, actually, because I think it would be informative for people to know how we script things. So I'll read you a little bit about from here. So you apparently were due to say, but didn't, well, the opportunity to game at the Hartenstein is utterly amazing. Full marks to you for flying the flag. Will you be back next year? And our response is scripted as waffle in big letters. And then your Sydney comes back in. Well, that's it then. Let's see if you've had time to do any work. We'll go to the workshop now. So in terms of how the conversation is actually scripted, we've sort of got you telling us roughly what you want to talk about.
Well, you're the stars of the show. I'm not going to write down what you're going to say.
I think it's interesting that you are clearly the star, because it's only you that actually says anything of import according to the script. And Nick and I, our entire input is summed up with the use of the word waffle at 7 locations in the script.
Yeah. Sometimes, if we're really lucky, it'll be Rich waffle about this and Nick waffle about that. That's about all the direction we get.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully one of the things we actually don't do is waffle, which brings us on to the third rule. So duration, should it be how long? And that's, I think, one of the things that we have genuinely wrestled with. Is it how long is too long? How short is too short? How long do you keep saying something for, Richard?
I think, just to go back a tiny bit, script is really important because we need to know what we're talking about, because otherwise we would literally go off a complete tangent. So actually, even though we're not told what we're going to say and how we're going to say it, it's really important to have that script to give a structure. In terms of duration, I don't know, it's a funny one, isn't it? After those American guys said, oh, TooFatLardies go on for 2 or 3 hours, I thought, no, surely not. Anyway, I went back and had a look. And what I note is that all our Oddcasts tend to rock up about 1 hour, 20-something minutes, more or less. And it's funny because when I do the paint and chat, sort of whenever I do it on a semi-regular basis, they always tend to rock up at about 1 hour, 25 to 30 minutes. So I think maybe that's kind of my attention span being reflected in that after 1 hour, an hour and a half, I'm going to start misbehaving and flicking elastic bands at people. So that's the point where you probably have to wrap it up. Is that too long or too short? Well, when we discuss it, we always say, oh, it should really be 55 minutes to an hour. But what then happens is, once we get into the big issue, we always overrun because we've always got something to say about it. And because we do the workshop first and we talk about where we've been and we talk about what we've been doing, that kind of eats up, I don't know, 20 minutes. So it's very difficult to have a set time period unless you just cut the conversation dead in an unnatural manner. Now, I listen to a few history podcasts online and they set themselves up. Yes, today we're going to be talking about the attack on Crete in 1940, whatever. And then they're half an hour long and you think, hold on a minute, the first 5 minutes was saying hello, the last 5 minutes was saying goodbye, there's a 2-minute advert in the middle, and I haven't really learned an awful lot about Crete, because clearly somebody is saying to them, look, podcasts have got to be short and sweet. People don't have the attention span to deal with anything longer than half an hour. And you end up thinking, I'm not going to listen to that again because I've gained very little from it, and certainly nothing from it in most instances. So I think if you're going to discuss a topic or a subject, you need to have time to explore that. And I think that's your job, Sid, at the end, to say, right, these two idiots have waffled on for long enough. Now it's time to pull the ripcord.
Yeah, it's about energy, really, isn't it? You know, you can have a really long, interesting discussion, or sometimes talk about something for 10 minutes. Feels like you've been talking about it forever. So yeah, it's all about keeping that going. I think because we've got 3 of us, we that probably generates a little bit of energy. I hope. I like to think so, more than just a monologue. Monologues are difficult to listen to, aren't they, generally?
Well, I'd agree with all of that. I mean, I think monologues, nobody wants to listen to that, really. I think if it's a monologue, it's got to be very short. I think different people like different things. Some people do like the chat.
Guests are good, aren't they, as well?
We'll come on to that in a moment.
I'm sorry.
Let's do it by order. Different people like different things. In my professional life, somebody once said to me about 25 years ago, try and say what you're saying in as few words as possible. And that was a great piece of advice. I think
that was a polite way of saying.
No, it actually wasn't, but a good try. And I think trying to compress things into making complex subjects very simple in as few words as possible is actually extremely difficult to do. Different people like different things, and some people do like chatter, and some people do like things compressed and really compacted. I think we try and aim for different things. We wouldn't want to cut the timing as regards a particular time, but also we don't want people just waffling. So, and that applies to podcasts I listen to. Some, I think, in the past, a few years ago, might have droned on about subjects relating to, I don't know, military history or maybe politics and economics. Some of those are really quite tedious, and when people start waffling, but trying to keep it focused, I think, is the main thing. Richard?
I've no idea what I was going to say. You bored me, and I lost my attention. My attention span went. I think that it's important. I think it's important that you feel that you've allowed time to explore the subject that we're talking about, and I'd be very interested to hear people's feedback. Do we go on too long? Do we not go on long enough? I don't know. That's the type of thing we never hear.
One thing I'd like to throw at this point, of course, is what I do with some of my podcasts, because they can be monotonous, and I listen to a lot of corporate ones and hobby ones. You normally got the option to play them back at a different speed. So if we talk really fast at this bit, this will really confuse anybody who's put us on at 2 times speed, because we're now sounding like we're going at 4 times speed. But it's an option, isn't it? It's a nice option to make it go faster. Generally, I tend to have mine at least sometimes 1.25 or 1.5. It just gets through it more quickly. Sometimes.
The alternative is just saying less, but having more weight to it. But those are different approaches. Anyway, but we want to move on from how long we're talking to what we're saying. So the fourth rule is content.
No. The fourth rule that you said was guests. I wrote it down.
No, that's purpose, script, duration, content. Guests is number 5, listeners 6, and editing 7. So content is number 4. What can I say that's interesting? Well, I think one of the ways in which a lot of podcasts deal with that is something which is topical and contemporary, and that is news to people. That's information about, in our circumstance, what we're thinking about, what rules, mechanics you've been using, the best bit on the bench, games days. So having something which is interesting. Now, something new almost by default is interesting because people might not have heard about it. But I think having something which is interesting, which is what we've tried to do with a big issue, has always been a focus of the podcast, as is the library, combining wargaming, military history, and reading. One of my views is that all wargamers are big readers. That is something which hopefully we can pass on interesting titles for people to read. I know I've certainly listened to other podcasts and found some really good stuff through listening to them. So, Nick,
something we need to do more of, but it's interesting when you talk about big issues of game design, then it's important to get the history books out. When you talk about big issues of what makes a good podcast, you can't go, well, Monty said podcasts should always be 45 minutes long. But I've enjoyed the ones where we've gone to the library and had to say why we like the books, and I've really enjoyed those ones. Maybe people want to hear more of that. Maybe they don't. I don't know. We're a wargaming podcast. Do people want to hear about the history, or do they want to hear about the wargaming?
Or do they want to hear about hobby hacks? I think, Sid, you threw the idea of hobby hacks out. What have we done that we can share that's I've made fences out of cocktail sticks, and maybe everybody else can learn about how to do that. Is that something people want to know? I don't know. If it is, you send your message to Sydney at whatever it is.
Well, leave your comments in the comments box, blah blah blah, whatever it is. But we do say, have we got any ideas? Do we want to do anything different? And some of those ideas are stupid, and we don't do them. But some of them are occasionally quite fun. Now, I'd like to do more of the defenestration of lard. We only did that once. It was great fun.
Yeah. And the other thing, Sid, but we spoke about this. We did move on. We did a couple of topics, if you remember, where Richard and I did the ops room work, which is we took a particular topic and we took it outside the Oddcast and did a special on it. And I think that's a valid way to cover particular types of content too.
I think that's a great idea, actually creating sort of separate podcast which really focus on just one issue. That is a really great example using the ops room. But I'm glad you mentioned the defenestration of Prague, and indeed, the defenestration of lard, because that comes on to item number 5 on my 7 rules, which is guests. When to have guests, when not to have guests. We have had guests, all of whom have been wonderful.
Apart from the shit ones.
No, they've all been great. They've all been great. You're peasants sometimes. Don't say that to our beloved guests. They won't come back. All the guests.
That's the idea.
Well, I think this is demonstrating and showing that we don't always are of the same mind as to how many guests we should have and who we should be talking to. I think one of the things with guests is that we've tried to have guests who might not otherwise have been on podcasts or have had an alternative voice for some of the great things that they've been doing. So when to have guests, when not to have guests. Let me open that up to you, Richard. You were the one who suggested a lot of the people who've come on. When did you decide to have guests and why?
Well, it's your show, mate, but some of the times I've suggested guests is when you've said, look, how about this is a big issue? And we go, yeah. And I go, well, why don't we invite so-and-so on because they know all about that? And I think one of the things that we actively didn't want to do when we started the Oddcast was go on the Wargamers merry-go-round where you seem to have about 20 people on the merry-go-round and I'd appear on their show, they'd appear on somebody else's show, I'd then appear on the same somebody else's show. And it did seem to be a little bit inward looking. We did nevertheless think when we start doing the big issues, we'll get some guests in. But somehow we got into the habit, and I guess lockdown reinforced this, where it was just the three of us. And also, somehow the three of us, I don't know, it seemed to be enough. We didn't seem to need another voice in every single show. But there have been some shows where we've invited people on, and I feel that because we're just not going through the mill and shelling out the same names. I think when those people have come on, they've really added something to the show, and that's been a highlight and a positive thing rather than just something that's ordinary.
I don't think we've ever had anyone on twice, have we? I'm not sure. Maybe that's because they get defenestrated afterwards. But the other thing is the other way we bring in guests, and I think we do this quite well. I think it works. Is when we go places, we often record audio when we're there. So we take people who could otherwise be listeners and turn them into guests as well, because we talk to them about what we're doing at Clotted Lard or where we are at Arnhem or whatever, and we'll talk to them. We did it with the We Have Ways Fest guys, didn't we? And I think that's another way of bringing different voices into the show.
And I think that's right. And I think the reason for bringing those people on is that they're giving us a perspective on that event that we wouldn't share. So they're giving us the gamer's eye view rather than the sort of TooFatLardies eye view. Sid?
I think that's a great point, isn't it? It's a gamer's eye view that they're trying to give us. No podcast wants to be self-referential, that we all sort of refer to each other as regards doing certain things. It's good really to have outside views from time to time, and taking the temperature of the room, taking people's views of the games days that we've organised. I think has always been a great way of doing it. So guests, yes, when appropriate, and I think that's certainly something that we'll do more of. But on to number 6, which is listener input, and that's something which I think we probably want more of. We really want people do comment, especially on the YouTube videos. People do send us emails directly. Thank you very much for those. Also things on Twitter and WhatsApp and various other different mediums. But we want to keep producing the show, and I think to do that we really want to give people what they want. And then we don't know whether people like all the different bits of the show or whether they want more of one and less of something else. It would be great to have that really coming through at some point. Nick?
Well, I was going to say Ask Sydney. We love Ask Sydney. I really always enjoy Ask Sydney. Whenever we put a request out for questions through Ask Sydney, I'm always hugely entertained by the questions, but also impressed at the depth of some of the ones as well. And some of them are real big issues that we can't go through in the short time that we have on that particular show, but they're really, really good fun. I love them. We love Ask Sydney. We should do more of it.
I like that, and I love it when we on those shows where we go, this is a really big issue, but don't worry, Ned, we'll be back to answer this in the next show, and then we forget to do it.
We never do. I know.
Which is terrible. I know. For example, Sydney, I've seen the letter from Ned in Woomagala, and I know he'd like to see more of you on the show and less of Nick and I. But there we are. So the different people have different views of things, and we would like to hear from you, the listeners. What you like doing. I mean, I really enjoy Ask Sydney, and I think some of the big issues, as Nick said, that come out of that are great. And and that some of them are curved balls that maybe we wouldn't think of throwing ourselves, and that's what's fun about it, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's been a big factor of Ask Sydney, especially when the questions are things that we would probably not have asked ourselves. So keep those coming. The shows which I've really enjoyed, which have good listener input, they do stand out as being good episodes. And we're not the only one to have listener input episodes. I think many of the podcasts that I really enjoy have had that from time to time, and I think it's all been for the good. Well, on to the last of the 7 rules, editing. I think one of the things which really shows a good podcast is when it's professionally produced, when it has a good editing. It's promptly produced as well. I think having a good release schedule is ideal. The podcasts that you want to wait to listen to and see them drop every month, they're always the sort of podcast which you know that there's another one coming around, and even if you don't particularly want, or you're not doing the modeling or the gaming in one show, there'll be another one around soon. So WSS is a great example of that, a very regular release schedule. I'm afraid over the years we haven't quite managed to do that, and that's really a function of our professional and personal lives, Nick.
Well, one of the reasons we called it the Oddcast was because there was no schedule to it. We just do it when we could.
And when we want to, which is more the point. I don't want to turn up and do an Oddcast when we've got nothing to talk about, no best bit on the bench, a bit like today. I mean, God almighty. If anything, if this show has proved anything, it's a show of 2 halves. The second half talking about what makes a good podcast, and the first half proving what doesn't. But I think that's important. It is an Oddcast because we do it when we're motivated to do it and really up for doing it. And I think that's important. Editing, I mean, do you have your own personal release schedule, Sydney? I mean, I don't. I tend to do the final editing. It's a lengthy process, but to be honest with you, the best thing about it is I edit with a very, very light hand. I mean, I might put a beep in this time. I didn't do it last time, but I tend to just sit here and paint while I'm listening to it. We do it first take, don't we? And we know we get it wrong. We know we're imperfect. And to be honest with you, I think that's maybe part of the charm. I think people know that we're pretty honest, 4 square blokes, and we're not worried about our image, and we say things that mean we can't monetize the podcast because I swear too much, although Nick appears to have got Tourette's over the last couple of shows.
Yeah, it's been a long week. It's been a long week. Last weekend I was in a cabin on a cross-channel ferry with you and 2 other middle-aged blokes, and I've been suffering from PTSD ever since.
Yeah, so I think a light hand in editing keeps us true to who we are, and the fact that we don't take it all too seriously, and I think that's important. But at the same time, it is important to edit because you want the product to be as good as it can be.
Well, that is the 7 different rules: purpose, script, duration, content, guests, listeners, and editing. If you have any other rules that we should be following, then please let us know.
I've got one. I've got one because I googled what makes good podcasting, and you've left one out that was on the list that I've got, and it says podcasts should have an engaging and interesting host.
Oh, the host with the most.
So where do we get one of those, Rich?
I don't know, mate, but as soon as we do, I know who's going to be down the unemployment office.
The defenestration of Sydney.
I could defenestrate
I think, to be honest, Sid, we could never get rid of you from. I think it's more likely to get rid of Rich and I than we get rid of you.
I think that's true. I
don't know. I don't know about that. Well, you could defenestrate me.
I do.
You do.
I think our lifestyle choices mean that you're far likelier than us two to be the last man standing. So,
well, who knows? Well, those are the 7 rules, and the 7.1.
But I've got a question, sir. I have a question, sir.
Please ask me the question.
I'm trying to keep things topical, and I'd like to know how the panel feels about monetizing the podcast.
Well, what a great question. We did actually just mention that briefly a few moments ago. So for anyone who hasn't,
again, mate, I'm sorry.
Well, you mentioned it. It was you that mentioned it.
Oh, did I? Right. Good. Okay. Well, it's a topical point, mate. When do we monetize? When do we monetize the hobby is the topical hot potato that everybody's been talking about. Monetizing a podcast? What do you think, chaps? Could we make our millions by putting this on Patreon and shutting out 90% of our customers? Will people back us for $2,000 each a month?
Well, my personal view is that no, we shouldn't.
No.
There are different views on this. So there are 3 excellent podcasts. Listen to them all in their entirety, I would say. So there's Big Lee Hadley. All 3 are great friends, so we don't need to keep repeating that. So Big Lee Hadley, Alex Sullen at the Storm of Seal, and Henry Hyde, of course, of Henry Hyde and the Battle Chats. They all released podcasts pretty recently over the last 2 or 3 weeks relating to the possibility of monetizing the hobby. And I think one element of that would be monetizing a podcast. And there were pros and cons to that. Certainly pros to monetizing a podcast and putting it behind a paywall for a certain period of time, and some cons to monetizing a podcast as well. I personally would sit on the non-monetizing side of that fence, because I think the Oddcast is an oddcast in some ways. It's not our regular job by any means. It has an unusual production schedule, and we talk about the things which just really interest us. So trying to monetize that is a bit like saying, well, we should really monetize ourselves. And I think certainly Nick and Rich, both of you monetize yourself enough through the hobby in the fact that you're the owners of a wargames publishing business. So that would be my view.
I'd like to monetize my dirty laundry. I'd like to be able to, every time I took a pair of socks off, I'd like to be able to put them on eBay and say, as worn by Sydney Roundwood, and sell them as celebrity dirty laundry. And I reckon we could make $1 million like that, but I'm not going to try it because it's a bit seedy. I think the key thing there is that what's your job? TooFatLardies is a business. We're about creating rules. What we're not about is making money from creating rules, but also making money about producing exclusive content. But I can understand that some people are all about making money. That's their job. The producing exclusive content is the key thing. If your business is making content, then go for it, and monetize that content. But Sydney is putting a sign up saying that he never wears underwear, so it's actually rather distracting. So we can't sell it on eBay. So that idea is out the window.
No. Actually, the sign he held up actually said, "I never wear your underwear."
Oh right. Well, I would want it to.
In case you were wondering who it was.
It put me off anyway. Suffice to say, we're not going to monetize because the money we get is making rules, designing scenarios. So it's not pertinent. But I think it's perfectly reasonable for other people whose job is content creators. Look at people like the guy who makes fabulous terrain and gives all the top terrain tips. This is how you make your foliage or whatever.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. He is in a perfect position to monetize what he's doing.
If you've got a skill and you can monetize it, fair enough. But if you're just chatting about what you do, I don't see that as a monetization opportunity, really.
What sort of sad git would pay money to listen to this shite?
Well, I think that's part of it, isn't it? Really, I mean, to some extent, when I was regularly doing the blog, a lot of people produce blogs, and they attempted, I think, at some point to try and monetize the blogs. And I never wanted to do that, even if it's just sort of having adverts. I felt that always would get between me and the people that actually wanted to read the blog. I didn't really want the adverts punctuating what I was trying to develop in the blog itself. I think the same is true of many hobbyists, but not of all of them. So Mel, the terrain tutor, the guys from the Painting Face, so Peachy and Pat and that lot, Henry, I mean, all of those are linked to Patreon sites, and good on it, because I think that they see that, as you say, Rich, as being a way of developing their own brand, which is relating to creating content. I think we create content in a different way, which is talking about it. But for us, in the way that we are just talking about things which really interest us, which is quite eclectic, I don't really think there's much point in seeking to monetize it. I wouldn't listen to myself for money. I can't expect other people to do so.
I like the freedom it gives us. Truly is what it comes down to for me. I know that if you put some stuff through a Patreon process, there is an obligation to produce things people are going to enjoy as exclusive deals, and that the pressure of that would just ruin it. And I'm here because I enjoy it, not for any other reason.
I totally agree. The fact, as soon as you say, right, I'm going to produce content every month, you're under pressure to produce content every month. And you're not only under pressure to produce content, you're under pressure to produce high quality content. And that's something we can't do. So take, for example, our best bit on the bench. We couldn't say, my best bit in the bench are these 3 really rubbish things if people were paying to listen to it. We'd have to find some good products. I can't be bothered with that.
Yeah, I agree with all that.
Crazy.
Absolutely.
One thing I would suggest, though, we might do or could do as a suggestion, it'd be nice to have some Oddcast merchandise, wouldn't it? I mean, that would be great.
Well, the Sydney Roundwood 2024 calendar could be available for next year.
What is that?
Well, Sid, you might not know about this, but I don't think we need your approval for it because we've already got the photos. I look at through my photo. We've got at least 12 lovely photos of you. That make it fantastic.
All doing different things. So in one, you look like Alan Titchmarsh tending a large marrow or something in your garden, and all different things. So it's kind of the seasonal Sydney catalogue.
Yeah.
So maybe in one, you could be skipping through April showers. The next one tending to May something flowers or whatever it is, whatever they go on about.
Well, you've been in my garden, it's a real passion. We did grow a huge pumpkin this year, but less of that. That's for a different podcast.
Don't forget, Sid, we were on a cross-channel ferry for 7 hours, and all we had to talk about was you. So there's plenty of things that we've got lined up for you for next year. And I do think the calendar is a real option for merchandise. We've already got your lovely photo on the postcard that people are sharing around the world, and which is beautiful. And we always like to see them. We saw that at Arnhem as well. It was on one of the tables there.
It was.
It's horrifying photo of a 2-year, 3-year-old fashion. We can't have that. We're going to have new things. Anyway, I think that brings us to the end of our big issue, but not the questions from Ned from Rumagama, because Ned actually did ask another question as well. He said, Sydney, please ask the boys what is happening with the following. Then there was a colon, and he put 3 dots. The first dot was GDM, from which I think he meant General Dame, number 2. Midgard, and then FEH, which I didn't take as an Australian insult. I thought that was the Far East Handbook. So can I ask on Ned's behalf what's happening on those 3 publications, Richard?
You can actually. Well, the great news is, mate, that since we got back from Arnhem, I'm feeling my blockage starting to move, which at my age is always encouraging. Midgard is now at the proofreaders. So James has done a lot of work on that because he's had a bit of time off work, so he's done a lot of work to that, and we moved that onto the proofreaders. The Far East Handbook, I've just today had some of the maps back, the final maps that I've been waiting on to get them dropped into that. I've got some of the final figures. I'm just hoping to get the gentleman in the Netherlands who's produced a new range of Dutch East Indies figures to let me have some images that we can use to drop in on the Dutch East Indies section there. And I've sent him an email, but I haven't heard anything back. So if you are in the Netherlands and speaking to May 1940 Miniatures, tell him to check his emails, because I just want to get that. So the Far East Handbook is absolutely almost completely finished. Just a few figures to paint, to drop in there, and the images, and it's all done. So that's happening very quickly. General Dame, with those other 2 now moving off my desk, Dave and I are working full steam ahead as of Monday on General Dame and getting that ready for publication. So things are really, really starting to move along with a big prune breakfast that is getting things moving. And of course, that then opens doors for the Arnhem stuff that Nick has kindly sent to me, but that's been sat in that terrible queue. And I know lots of people get fed up with it, but it's just everything came along at once and blah, blah, blah. You've all heard the story. I'm not telling it anymore. So it's moving. I like to move it, and it is happening.
That's fantastic news, and no doubt we will be bringing more news of those developments to Ned and everyone else during the course of the rest of this year and indeed next year. Well, I think that probably brings us to the end of the show. We have no show events to really talk about because it's our closed season to the end of the year, but we do have a couple of things to mention. The first one being the special, Nick.
Lard Magazine. Lard Magazine will be coming out as it usually does around Christmas time. We're starting to put that together now. I put a few shouts out on social media this week about anybody who has something they'd like to share with the community to send across to me. So we are open. DM, direct message us either on Facebook or direct message me or you or Rich on Twitter if you have anything you'd like to contribute. Always looking to receive scenarios, articles, terrain builds that relate to making great tables, but scenarios for any of the Lard range of family of rule sets. So anything from Infamy through to I Ain't Been Shot Mum through to What a Cowboy, What a Tanker, Chain of Command, Sharp Practice. We do get quite a lot of stuff for Chain of Command. So if you're interested in one of the other rule sets, it's always nice to try and get some differences out there. But we've already got a lot of stuff lined up. I have no doubt whatsoever that it seems to get bigger every year, like I do, and this is looking like it will be another big one. We're going to be doing the battlefield walk that we did at Drill. We'll be doing a mini campaign around that, I think, Rich, won't we?
Half pint campaign.
Half pint campaign. Some interesting action with the poles, and so I'm glad I painted my poles. Actually, we used them at Arnhem this time around. So my Polish platoon. So if you want to get a Polish platoon and start painting that, we can give you something to do with it after into the new year over Christmas. And anything goes really. We are not restricted by page size because we produce a PDF, so we're not restricted by what we can put in. As long as it's interesting and we think other people would be interested in it, then we will be happy to include it in the mag.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important thing. It can be fairly esoteric, can be off the wall, it can be about any subject under the sun you think people are going to be interested in. We are interested. So please do get in touch.
And worth saying that previous years' Lard mags are all still available. Back to about 2004, Lard magazines and the Christmas and summer specials we used to do are all still available on the website.
Yeah, nearly 20 years of it now, mate. Wow.
And then there's the second of the two items I mentioned, which is the Advent calendar, Richard. So over the last few years, people probably realise we've put together some thoughts on the 24 days of Christmas, each of us giving 8 different perspectives on the hobby, generally with the same set of questions. And I think, Richard, we're going to be doing that again this year.
Yeah, that's right, Sid. It's Christmas time. There's no need to be afraid. I think that's the key message. Because you'll be able to cuddle up by the fire with a nice mulled wine and listen to your dulcet tones and Sid and my less than dulcet tones telling everybody about all sorts of stuff about our exciting hobby experiences. Now, how about this? Talking about input from our listeners, what questions would you like to hear us answer on the Advent calendar? Right. Come on, we want to know what you want to know. What are Sydney's darkest secrets? What would you like us to talk about on the Advent calendar? Because we know we've got it coming, but we know, but we've still got 3 weeks before we've got to start recording that. But it's not far away, so send us some ideas. What would you like to know? Because, as I said, this podcast has made me reflect on the fact we don't listen to you guys and girls enough. So we want to hear from you now.
I think that's a really good point. I think also over the years with the Advent calendar, they have been very punchy. So we try and go for 5 minutes. Sometimes they go up to about 7, 8, or even 9 minutes, I think. But we try and make those punchy. But over the years, we've had different approaches to that. So we've talked about many of the topics that we can think of, but there may well be things that you want us to explore more, or there may be topics that we just not covered and you'd really be interested in. So yeah, if you could let us know those, that would be very welcome, Nick.
What we're really saying is we're running out of ideas. Give us some of yours, because
Yeah.
We'll be scratching our heads about what to talk about otherwise.
At the moment, the Advent calendar is being held hostage by us three dangerous desperados. And unless you pay the ransom with questions, we're going to blow its head off.
Yeah.
It's very much a scenario from What a Cowboy. Anyway, it's probably about that time for me to thank both of my guests, Richard Skinner, Richard Clark.
Sorry,
Here we go.
Richard Skinner was one of the best DJs they had. I agree.
Nicholas Roundwood. And that's all from me, Sidney Clark.
Yes, Nick Skinner and Richard Clark.
Yes, goodbye, everybody. Thanks for listening. Cheerio.
We'll let Roger Barraclough, who I will get that name right from the script, and the band play us out. Thank you, everyone, for listening. See you next time.
Bye-bye.
In tonight's show, Sidney Roundwood, joined by Nicholas Skinner and Richard Clark. Music by Roger Barraclough and his band.